Thank you, Tony, for that introduction, and good afternoon. Once again, as Chair, Dr. Tony Simons, Dr. Swaminathan, Dr. Tiwari, and Professor Gunasena, distinguished participants. We've heard since the inaugural session this morning the multifarious benefits of agroforestry. Its almost silver bullet-like nature, and yet we find that it has not become a movement, or it has not reached the desired scale, which after so much benefits and everyone recognizing those benefits, it still hasn't happened. And in the course of today's deliberations and in the course of the presentations made, we also got a glimpse of the constraints which have held it back from achieving the levels that it should. Now, I'm not going to go into the details or repeat what has already been said, but I would like to share with you a few perspectives as we developed the national agroforestry policy for our country. As Secretary of the National Advisory Council, I was very closely involved in the formulation of the policy. And I would like at this stage to acknowledge and to thank Dr. V.P. Singh, who is the South Asia coordinator of ICRAF, who worked very closely with the National Advisory Council to give it the shape which was finally endorsed by the Union Cabinet on the 6th of this month, making it a formal policy which was announced this morning by the Union Agriculture Minister. And you will be very shortly able to access it. It will be put on the website, but because the Indian Parliament is in session, the policy must first be placed on the table of the Parliament before we can make enough copies and share it with you. Now, if the theme of this Congress is the dictum to go by, which says trees for life, accelerating the impact of agroforestry, then I feel that the notification of this the national policy on agroforestry today is very timely. It's very spot on, and it is just the impetus which is needed to accelerate the impact of agroforestry in India. Mr. Ashish Bahuguna, the Secretary of Agriculture, whose department is going to be the nodal department for implementing this policy, has highlighted the various components and the various dimensions of this policy. And I remember that in April 2002, I was Joint Secretary in the Ministry of Agriculture when we held the first international workshop on adaptation to climate change for agricultural productivity, and Dennis Garrity, who was the then Director General of ICRAF, in this very same hall, had for the first time made a very strong case for agroforestry as a means for adaptation to climate change for agricultural productivity. And it has taken us 12 years to actually bring to fruition something which should have been done much earlier. I understand that India is among the very few developing countries to have notified the national policy. So the four issues that I will share with you are being shared with the objective that there may be other countries also who may be thinking along these lines and therefore might be looking at some of the same challenges that we did as we tried to take this process forward. Now, one of the questions that came up for discussion among our various stages of consultation was where should the focus of this policy be? The agroforestry systems are very wide-ranging in India, as they are in other parts of the world, in other developing countries. On the one hand, we have simple agroforestry. We have a subsistence farm, and the farmer plants a few trees on the field boundaries. There is intercropping of trees with crops. There's trees and livestock. And on the other extreme of the spectrum, there is commercial agroforestry. Recognizing that about 80% of our farmers are small and marginal, that is, they have less than 2 hectares or 1 hectare of land, and these are the farmers, many of them in 60% of India's cultivated area, which is rain-fed. They are subject to extreme weather variability, long-term climate change effects. Their lands are marginal and often characterized by soil degradation, water stress, and depleted biodiversity, and they're very risk-prone. So our national policy, first and foremost, is geared towards the small and marginal farmers, although it also addresses the other agroforestry systems. But the thrust and the emphasis and the focus deliberately is on small and marginal farmers and increasing their productivity, their sustainable livelihoods. So that was one of the first issues which came up before the groups which discussed and deliberated on it. The second issue that guided us was the fact that the Indian government in November 2013 legislated the very ambitious National Food Security Act 2013, which guarantees a very highly subsidized food grain to 2/3 of the population. That is, 820 million people in our country are guaranteed food grains at 3 rupees and 2 rupees a kg, which is about 6 cents per kg. That's the extent of subsidies, practically free food. To be able to meet its legal obligations, the Government of India has to supply, through its public distribution system, something like 65 million metric tons of food grains every year. And therefore, keeping food grain production very much in the center was also an important consideration as we developed the policy. And that is why we were very cautious to ensure that we did not build in incentives for land coming out of, especially prime agricultural land coming out of agriculture. And therefore the thrust was on tree-based farming systems where trees are complementary to crops and not substitutes. The third dimension that I wanted to share with you was something which I think all of us who look at agroforestry are confronted with at some time or the other. Is it to do with agriculture, or is it to do with forestry, or is it to do with both? And if it is to do with both, then who will take the ownership? Who will be accountable? Who will be responsible? And that was exactly the same thing which was going on in our country also for a long time. The forestry people generally mentioned agroforestry in several of their ongoing programs, but it still did not get the priority and the impetus that it needed. And the same thing happened with the Agriculture Ministry as well. And therefore, it was felt that it should finally, the agreement was that it should anchor in the Ministry of Agriculture with an equal partner in being the Ministry of Environment and Forest. And that's how it came to be that a innovative mechanism, either in the form of a mission or in the form of a board, an institutional mechanism which would give all the other stakeholders an equal right to be heard and to give their input into the decision-making process. And that is why it is proposed that there will be an agroforestry mission with a corpus of funds, maybe something to the order of about 30 or 40 million dollars, which in turn will leverage a much higher quantum of funds from the ongoing programs. The last point that I want to share with you is that the agroforestry policy is a very unique mechanism, a very unique instrument, in the sense that it doesn't have a stand-alone architecture of its own. It will have a small architecture, it will have a small mechanism in the form of this agroforestry mission, but it is through its horizontal linkages with several of the ongoing mega programs on natural resource management, sustainable agriculture, Green India Mission, where funds are already available for afforestation, for plantation on lands, for developing nurseries, and with a small corpus of maybe 30 to 40 million dollars, this should be able to leverage the ongoing programs, from the ongoing programs, the forestry and the agroforestry component, which is even today of the order of about 800 million to $1 billion worth of program. So that is the uniqueness of this policy, and I think it's also its strength. Because if today we had gone to our finance minister and said, give us $800 million, we want to do an agroforestry program, we would probably have not been able to get the funds. But to be able to say that if we have a small amount of funds in a corpus with a mechanism which in turn could leverage, could coordinate, could converge the various programs where agroforestry is actually sitting, but very disparate, very piecemeal, and give it a scientific thrust, have science and scientific and technical backstopping, and the various other things which were highlighted in the presentation of the Secretary in terms of access to markets, in terms of quality planting material, in terms of ensuring that the right kind of financial products are available. Today you'll be surprised to know that while we have crop loans and banks give huge amount of crop loans to farmers, there are no financial products which will give crop loans and credit for trees. There are no insurance products for trees. That is the kind of thing this policy will bring together. So the partnerships which are going to be part of this exercise and the uniqueness of this policy sets it apart from some of the other programs that we have. And I think that is the strength of this policy. It's also its uniqueness. Of course, it will require tremendous amount of managerial skill because we are used to working in vertical silos. We'll need to look horizontally then. So with these words, I would like to thank you very much for your patient hearing. And like we said, that with this policy, we've taken one small step, and individually and collectively, we have an inescapable obligation to ensure its effective implementation, because to announce a policy is one word, to roll it out and to implement it effectively is another. And we hope that in the fullness of time, it will culminate in a giant leap for the smallholder farmers of India. So thank you very much.